Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Amherst Planning Board Housing Subcommittee.
Oh.
It is Wednesday, May 14th. Time is 7:05. Oh, now we don't have any attendees.
No, I just looked, so we've lost Doug.
There was one before I started. Maybe he'll come back. Hope he comes back. I guess we'll take a roll call vote, see who's here. So just indicate if you're present when I call your name. Bruce Colden.
I am here.
Fred Harwell.
I am here.
Karen Winter.
Here.
And I, Jesse Major, am here as well. Announcements were first on the agenda. I don't have any announcements other than I don't have minutes ready for this week. So get them. There's only one missing meeting, I think, and I'll get that together for the next time. Anyone else have announcements for the group? Oh, there's someone.
No. But we could continue our, anything more to be said about Jared?
No, I really just wanted to have a conversation with him. So that's
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think we could,
yeah, we can
I
return.
don't think we've received any emails from him, so I don't know how we get in touch.
Yeah.
But Jared Smith is probably it's
Yeah.
a name that might be findable.
Yeah. I do see one attendee, which is Doug. Unless there's objection, I would like to bring Doug over to be part of the conversation. Any objections to that plan like we've been doing? Okay, seeing no hands, Doug, I'm going to move you over.
Jesse, he's on a LinkedIn. You can find him on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I did find that. There was just a phone number,
Oh.
not an email. But
Okay.
that's fine. I'll just call. Doug, I'm trying to move you over. Not sure if you're getting the message. You need to accept. Maybe I'll just allow you to talk and see if that way works. Oh, there we go. Okay, well, maybe not. Not sure what's going on.
Nate, can you help?
Nate, I think, is on his phone at a soccer game, he says.
Yeah,
so.
I'm no longer host, but I'll see what we can do with Doug. I can't promote him or anything either right now.
Oh, I'm getting a message that says allow to talk's not available because Doug is using an older version of Zoom Workplace app. I need to promote Doug to a panelist to talk, but that's also what I'm trying to do, and that's not working, which is very strange. I was just saying today at a meeting at work, how many years is it going to take before we know how to use Zoom? Apparently, we're not there yet.
I know how to use it at the passive level that I've been using it for 6 years.
But there's constantly problems like this. Okay, I'm not sure what to do. I'm gonna, in a minute, oh, Doug left. Okay, well, maybe he'll rejoin. Maybe his Zoom's updating. We will proceed and hopefully get him back. All right, so the main discussion I thought we'd have tonight was working on the North Amherst overlay. Hopefully to help Nate get that in shape to bring back to the full board. And it looks like Nate sent us some things. I will confess I've had very little time to process.
I haven't seen them. When did they come?
I sent stuff today. It was, things that were in a previous planning board packet with some updated notes from the April 23rd housing subcommittee meeting.
I opened it up and I saw housing goals and strategies at the bottom, and I didn't scroll further down. Okay. Oh, I see the two there.
There's just a couple of maps, right?
Yeah.
Yep, maps, and then there's like a Word document with notes, considerations or things for the overlay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Correct. So maybe, Nate, you can just tell us what's the most useful conversation to have. Like, should we
Yeah,
go through the notes and discuss points there, or?
yeah, I think going through those points would be good. We've heard a lot of concern from residents that it'll be too dense. And so I think, like we talked about last time, kind of what kind of density are we looking for? I think building height and design is really important. The idea of we might have to define new residential uses that are not in the bylaw. For instance, right now, if we just said apartments, it'd be limited to 24
Right.
units. If we said social dormitory, that's not allowed outside the RF zone. So then, do we create an overlay that says you can have social dormitories in some area of it, and then other areas you can have apartments and mixed use buildings, but we allow apartments to be more than 24 units. And so I think just kind of having that general conversation, getting down to those specifics. I think even, setbacks or height is good. Um,
And you've heard from residents they're worried about density recently in response to our conversations?
yeah, I think they've, from the housing subcommittee, and then when the planning board has mentioned it a few times at meetings in the last like 2 months, I think it just gets airtime, either through, they rewatch the videos or something. And so, yeah, they've contacted staff and, just said, how much more can, North Amherst absorb? It's already pretty dense.
Good.
They're worried about traffic. And so I think those are all, good points to talk
Yeah.
about. We touched on them a little bit last time. And so, it's almost like if we are going to have some student housing, do we say, no car, would we have provisions for limited parking to reduce that amount, right? There's probably ways to handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi,
Oh,
Doug.
Doug's here.
Made it back.
Hello.
So,
So, yeah, I mean, I was actually thinking about that last weekend for some reason also, that maybe we needed a different building definition if we're gonna do more than just this one overlay, which I assume that's where we're headed. Like with the idea that we're trying to define places where more density is desired. It seemed like having apartment building with more than 24 units on the books as a option might be easier, right? Karen, go ahead.
So the idea of having a cut through from 116 and having taller buildings on that side is something that we talked about. And that appears to me as a possibility because it would not increase then the traffic going through, those places that are so dense. And I think it wouldn't interrupt the neighborhood. I think we should sort of look at the map and see if that's a possibility and then have that and then declare that a different kind of an area where we could put social dormitories, for example.
Yeah, although social dormitory is, I don't remember the exact definition, but that's slightly different too, right? I mean, that's not,
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
essentially it's an apartment for matriculated students. At and it's like I said, it's only allowed on the fraternity residence zone. So, we could use that in the overlay and part of it. And I think we talked about before. What's kind of the purpose of the overlay is something to talk about. Is it really students? Is
yeah,
it a mix? I think that could drive some of the conversation. Or is part of it students only or not?
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Fred?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of doing anything that increases social dormitories. Um, I I think rather we, it's occurred to me in my time now coming back to the planning board after having served 2 terms a while back. And it occurs to me that very possibly the 24 apartment limit may have outlived its usefulness, and maybe that number should change. And if it did change, it would solve a lot of problems that we keep seeming to run up against. And it certainly would make it a lot easier to deal with this, what we're talking about in North Amherst.
Mhm.
Fred, you're talking about town-wide or in the overlay?
Well, we can do it in the overlay. I'm beginning to wonder now, and I'll just throw it out there, whether that 24 unit limit has outlived its usefulness and maybe should be simply removed and allow the permit evaluation process to go forward without that cluttering it, and leave it to the permit granting authority to impose a limit if they think it's appropriate.
You mean site by site?
Yeah. Just, that's kind of out there. I don't think anyone's put it on the table, but I think we might think about it.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Doug, want to add?
Yeah, in response to Karen's comment about some sort of connection to 116, I believe there are wetlands along the east side of 116 all the way from Pine Street south to UMass. So I view that as a low probability step that you could take. I don't think it would fly with the Conservation Commission. And not to mention that's a state road. So, it's not something the town can do itself. And to create a new turnoff along that when it's a pretty high speed section of road might be prohibitive.
Yeah, valid, totally. We did discuss the wetlands last time, but yeah, I guess state road does add a lot of complications. The other thought we had brought up was essentially bringing in a road more or less parallel to 116 from Meadow Street, right? So, do I have that right? Yeah, like just off 116, if you could turn in over there, just to the east of the wetlands, to then enter into this new high dense area would be maybe a possibility. I think Nate, you were saying that gets tricky also because it then requires part sort of collaboration with all the different owners of those parcels, but not impossible. Bruce, something related?
I was going to say much as Doug said about the road. I think the opportunity of getting a road in there would be, I mean, sorry, the getting a road in there, I think would quieten a lot of the concerns about density. So recognizing that it's difficult for two reasons. One of them is a kind of a black and white thing. It's we either can or we can't, depending on wetlands. And if there is a break in the wetlands along the entirety of that, then we could go to the next step, which is probably an arduous process of dealing with the state. But and Nate, you could chime in as to whether the resources of the town can be spent with something like this, whether it's possible. But the prize is significant because I think it would translate into acceptable higher densities and more housing there. Which moves to my main point, Jesse, which when you said how density is a concern, I'm being particularly impressed or affected by the Healy administration's work, and I guess it was put at us very clearly and by Kyle Wilson twice now already, and I'm thinking that increasingly that it is our job as a planning board to help our constituent neighbors and understand that the need on the one hand and the and the rather limited amount of opportunity on the other. So I think we can't. It's wishy-washy for us to imagine that we have to cave into concerns of people like me, because I'm a resident as well, about all this traffic and all this stuff. I think everybody's going to have to put up with some aggravation, because that's the only way if we're going to get that housing. I mean, it's quite interesting to me to see that in town anyway, the inflection point around the time of the moratorium in the 1980s, the building moratorium for I think 2 years, and it's almost as though we never recovered from that, because right at that point there's a deviation between the growing population on the one hand and the flattening of the housing production relatively, because up until that point the two were more or less in sync for 20 or more years, and then that happened. And I think we have to get to a point where we're well informed on this. We have to believe what we're saying, and then we have to confront and argue and with our neighbors, because we're the people who supposedly have taken the time and trouble to understand these things. And I think we can't afford simply to understand them and imagine that, well, it's a real problem, but somehow or other we don't have the balls to make the argument against our neighbors because we don't want them to think that we're bad people. Well, I'm sorry, that's not the way I'm going to behave. I think we have an obligation here to really understand if what we are being, what the data is showing to us, we have to recognize that there are precious few opportunities in town, and these overlays that we're doing are really the 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 sharp end of the stick at the moment in terms of creating more development opportunities. So I don't think we should put time and effort into this and then cave and then basically only get 50% of what we think we could get if we were able to prevail in what we think is an intelligent argument. So that's at the moment, it's an evolving, strongly held opinion on my part. I'm not sure that I'm fully informed yet, but if it keeps going in that direction, that's the line that I'm going to take in the board, in the committee, and publicly.
I largely agree. I think we have a tricky dynamic of students and the missing middle, right? Because they're very different. But
Yes,
that's what our
and being
town's struggling
the
with, right?
being the North Amherst I'm not representative, but being the sole, I think the only person on the board that's living up this end of town, I'm probably going to be the one that gets beaten up over this, and I'm prepared
So
to take some punishment.
so on the, just backing up for a second, Fred, on the wetland issue, where does that conversation start? Is that first Conservation Commission could tell us this would just be impossible, or
Are you talking about an access from 116?
yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that's not a feasible thing to approach. I think actually like 10, 15 years ago, UMass even maybe briefly discussed it. Maybe that was 20 years ago. And it's really complicated. That section of 116 is the limited access highway. There's a river there.
right?
I mean, I think the better option would be to have, approach it and encourage, right, something from Meadow Street and kind of a whole new road layout.
Sure.
And that could be done with, say, flexible zoning requirements in terms of frontage or things. I think coming from 116 is, if someone wants to pursue it, but the town's not going to put energy into trying to do that.
Okay, fair. So then, does sound like we're largely in agreement that that would really help this alleviate a lot of concerns and just maybe make it a better density district anyway, if there's more access in, right? And then,
Right.
and we had also discussed the possibility of it going all the way through to campus, to UMass campus. And that probably has other issues on the south end. But maybe that's doable. Fred, and then I want to try and refocus our conversation a little bit. Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, regarding the south end of this, there's a dirt road that goes behind the cold storage building, and I think it goes to as far as North Village. And that might be low-hanging fruit in terms of if that were developed into an actual road. It gets, I think, pretty close, or maybe even into what we're talking about without having the issues of that we have on the other end, headed north. So I don't want to lose track of that other road.
Yeah,
Are you looking at Google Earth, Jesse?
yeah, I am.
Good.
And-
I'm thinking
I
of
know-
trying to drive that road. I don't have a.
That's that last time we were talking about too, that there already is, sort of looks like a dirt road.
Okay. Maybe I'll have a shot at it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's maybe back up and try and focus and get some agreements among us. Like the main thing Nate brought up first, which was what do we see as a real purpose here of this overlay, right? And I think to me, the main goal is greatly increase density with students in mind. Because as we've discussed numerous times, it's one of the only locations with great proximity to UMass where students could easily walk or bike or jump on a short bus and get to campus. Right? I'm also in favor of not waiving the inclusionary zoning, but thinking strategically about how to maybe group that together in a different part of this overlay, like we had brought up last time also. And I know, again, I know there's lots of issues around doing that, but it did seem like there may be an opportunity to create a large density student community, and also a separate, more family oriented, with many of the inclusionary units there on one edge of this overlay. So that's what I'm thinking. Maybe others want to join in, see if we're in agreement. Bruce.
I agree. I think it's a good wording, greatly increased density with student accommodation in mind. I mean, if that's the one sentence, I think that's the important. I don't know that there was any disagreement or issue about putting the inclusionary zoning. I think we have to do that because we're at risk of pushing the 10% in the wrong direction if we get into the habit of not doing that in student areas. And I think the way we deal with it is not to disperse it, but to consolidate it and so forth. And so, but I think the real purpose, which is the question, the real purpose, I think you put it in a sentence, Jesse. The real purpose is to increase density with student accommodation in mind, and then we can tack on some justifications and so forth. But those are defending the proposition,
Yep.
which is that the real purpose is student accommodation.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Doug.
I don't know whether we're at the wordsmithing point of view, but with students in mind, I could go down to the pizza shop and buy a pizza with students in mind. So it seems to me if we want to provide housing for students, we should just say that.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
So,
right.
and-
Yeah, sure.
and is
I
that-
agree.
Doug, are you in agreement with that goal here?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I would agree that the focus market for these ought to be the students.
Okay.
I guess I hadn't thought much about inclusionary zoning, and I think that feels a little complicated if you're really targeting students. So
Yeah,
maybe you've already talked about that.
we did talk about it a bit. That's what led to this idea of trying to develop, not disperse them and somehow have them more or less together, even across all these parcels somehow.
Yeah.
Gets tricky, but it
The
seems
thing
like
is, Doug, that we've got with the generation rate, we've got a community of of 30 or 40 houses that would be generated this way, and so dispersing them as we could make a little community of the co-housing community. It doesn't because, you know, it would be a high functioning community, and we think about where we put it, you know, closer to the public transit and so forth, perhaps, or not. I don't know. That's the thing. But the inclusionary zoning, with the sense of creating a clustered concentration of family housing.
Yeah.
And you would be okay with creating the zoning that allows an area for students and an area for below market housing, and having the student area get built out and nobody taking interest in doing the below market area?
No, I think, well, no, that's a good point as a bad possibility of what would happen. I think we were somehow assuming it would be baked in to the each development, that somehow it would happen.
see.
It wasn't like
I
two
see.
opportunities. It would be
So
part.
if you, at the same time, you're building
Yeah.
the student housing, you're building some
Correct.
affordable housing in another location.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And like one possibility is, you know, along with this idea that things can get taller as you go east to west because of the slope and just because of how removed it is from East Pleasant Street. Maybe, you know, the zoning is somehow family-oriented design of units toward East Pleasant in each parcel, including the inclusionary, but not just the inclusionary. And then as you move west into these parcels, it becomes the denser apartments for students. So that,
I see.
if that were the theme all along, that could sort of by default make, as Bruce said, upwards of 30, 40, 50 units for more designed with families in mind, inclusionary and non-inclusionary along closer to the street with all the density happening toward 116. But this is one idea. Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to lose track of the simple fact, and North Village is a classic example of this. Especially when you start talking about graduate student housing, you are frequently involved with families. And they would benefit from this. And they did benefit from North Village before UMass wrecked it, because they had a layout that allowed for multiple families to be in view of each other and function cooperatively with childcare and so forth. My wife knows quite a bit about this, and she and I have talked about this. And yeah, I don't see any necessary distinction. I mean, I obviously know what the differences are, but I think you can very profitably generate housing in this location that, and particularly at the graduate student level, frequently involves the placement of families.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Doug, is your hand still up? Okay. So in general, Fred, you agree with the goal here, sounds like. Oh. Yep, you're muted.
Yes, I do.
Karen, you want to weigh in on that before we move on? You're muted as well.
I totally agree. I totally agree.
Okay, so before this comes up next, I'll work on some language trying to justify and put at the head of whatever comes up, keeping in mind your comment, Doug, about being straightforward. Yeah, Nate, go ahead.
So I guess when we say students, would we exclude non-students? You know, we could just say it's, market rate housing, and whoever, besides the inclusionary, whoever moves in, whoever moves in. Is that,
Yeah,
or are we?
absolutely. I don't think we're excluding anybody. I think what I can imagine in conversations is it's important to potentially justify it to help address the UMass population, right?
Okay, so I guess, yeah, in that instance, I just would want to make sure, for instance, so, you know, unless we came up with a new definition, so say, for instance, we do this and a developer, essentially rents it out en masse to all UMass students or has UMass rent 4 floors or something. Is that now no longer an apartment building or whatever we're calling it? I mean, because of the way it's rented, or are we kind of agnostic on that because it's really the market can decide, who lives where? I just want to make sure, because the way that our bylaw works is we have to put it in the closest use category. And so
Right.
if that's how it's going to work, we just have to be clear for, the building commissioner and everyone else what the kind of understanding is there. Would we allow that? Say we allow a building, would we allow it to be rented by the university?
Sure.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think I'd have a problem with that.
Right.
Certainly not if that was known going into it as possibilities, unlike what recently happened in town. But yeah. Bruce, go ahead.
I wouldn't have a problem with that. I think, Nate, we'll leave it to you to make sure the technical language is correct, or if there are phrases and so forth that need to be introduced into the lexicon of the bylaw, that we discuss that and so forth. I will be led by you on that. I think your question as to whether we would be okay with families, whether it would be exclusively students or not, the answer was no. Of course, we can have others and so forth. But I think the reason that you asked certainly the reason that I thought you asked the question was as much what is the real purpose, and we said that it is increased density with student accommodation as the focus. It was so that we would not be shy, not be coy about this intention in the public meetings that we're having. So sure, whoever has the developer can market it and so forth as they see fit. It's just that we recognize that it seems that 80% of the rent demand for rental housing in town at the moment is for off-campus students. That seems to be from the numbers that I put together, that seems to be the overwhelming candidate for rental housing in town. And so we have to recognize that, and that's what I say. We have to be clear, and we have to not scurry away from that. It's a problem that has to be solved, and we can't pretend it's not. And so we know that whenever we ask Kyle and others, they'll talk, well, they rent to whoever walks in, all this kind of stuff, whatever version of modestly and acceptably divisive commentary that they put. But I think that we don't want to be in that game anymore. We on this thing here, we're not playing that game. We're being clear that the likelihood is that it's a predominantly student, and that we may be wrong, but we're probably not. The data says that that's who wants house. That's who wants rental housing in town, and it's not enough. And we were trying to release the pressure on the RG district, and this is a good place to do it. And a lot of people in North Amherst are going to be not okay with that, but we have to convince them that they have to be okay with that, because that's the big picture.
Yeah, I would agree. Doug, go ahead. I'm gonna step out from here. There's some weird sound going on in my house. I'll be right back.
All right. Then Nate, are the presidential apartments just zoned and permitted as market rate apartment housing for anybody?
They are, there's affordable units that are, deed restricted because of inclusionary zoning, but essentially that,
Yeah,
it
that's
became
a market rate. Anybody
Yep.
walks in,
Yep.
doesn't matter who it is.
Right.
Yeah, so I assume that's how we would, the height and the density might change, but the sort of regulatory context for the new overlay to the north would be similar to how the presidential apartment complex is now.
Right. I just think, like I said, the issue would be, if we learn after the fact that, oh, it's all, rented by the university or by one entity, is that in violation of how we would define it? And, typically zoning doesn't get into ownership. And so,
Right.
I would kind of agree. It's just, I want to make sure we, I'll have to talk to the building commissioner and see how we can, right, come up with a way to do that.
Yeah,
just for
so-
instance, yeah.
Well, so as Bruce said, I think the student focus or keeping students in mind, that is really our public context for setting up the overlay, but it's not that we want to limit the marketing or the occupancy in any way to any particular group.
Right, right. Agreed. And, for instance, like Puffton Village right now, say, to me, that's, the two big properties. Maybe there's three in that.
And Brandywine.
And Brandywine. But I'm just saying, like Puffton, that's 600 units now or whatever it is, right? If that doubled and we had, just 10% or 12% or 15% inclusionary zoning, there's a sizable number of affordable units. And so what we had talked about was, could there be, almost like a designation zone or zones within the overlay where those affordable units would be built. And so the market rate developers would either have to partner or pay a lot into a fund or something to get those units built, whether or not they do themselves. But, is there something that we could have that happen?
Well,
Middlebury's,
there are, I'm sorry, I'm maybe talking too much already.
Go ahead, please.
There are graduate students at UMass who qualify for
yes, yeah.
That kind of housing. So you could still be helping grad students and have the inclusionary zoning at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Even undergraduates, if they're, 25 and haven't been a dependent for 2 years, or, there's a number of kind of categories that would qualify students to be eligible for inclusionary zoning.
Okay, so I think we're all in agreement on the purpose, which is good. Not surprising. Bruce, more on this topic?
No, I was going to pursue Nate's thoughts on the how the inclusionary zoning sugars out.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so Nate, I was as far I'm good. I'm good with it. I'm more than good. We have we must maintain the inclusionary zoning requirement. We should eliminate the expectation and requirement that be distributed so that it's clustered. And then you got to the point where well, it looks like I'm giving you the middle finger, doesn't it? I'm not really. I'm just counting backwards. So then you were saying, and it is the intent in my head anyway, the design intention would be that this clustering is thought about and located in a particular place, and that we should care about how that works in relation to the whole of the overlay. So I suppose we are, number 3, designating or trying to designate or imagining that we want to and figuring out how to designate a place where this happens. And I think then number 4, you're saying that if that happens, then it's possible that we've created 2 projects because the person of the entity that's building the more densely high-rise housing, it may be that the clustered inclusionary housing works better, not as 4 stories or 5 stories, but as 2 or 3, and maybe we want to say that. And so we may be creating a situation where we have got multiple or creating a development problem that we have to recognize and figure out a way how to facilitate. And so I just want to make sure whether I understood the trajectory of your thinking correctly. Was that an accurate reflection of your thought process about inclusionary zoning and locating it, etc.?
It is, yeah. I think that, yeah, no, that's a good summary, Bruce. I think the idea is to get units built, but then what I'm thinking is that the people who are going to be building the market rate housing are not the same kind of developers who would want to be doing the affordable or inclusionary units. And that,
Mm.
it's really hard to tie a project down and say like, find a partner or, find a part. Maybe we do, maybe we have requirements. They find a partner and provide a fair amount of funding. But are they the ones going to be doing all of it, or would they, partner with like a Wayfinders or Valley CDC? I just think most of these developers don't really understand affordable housing.
I think the
especially
latter.
yeah.
And in fact, that was the way the very first co-housing community in the country was done. It was done exactly as this. It was the required affordable component of a much larger development. And the developer was wondering how the hell to go about this. And along came this co-housing community and basically rode a wave that they didn't imagine was going to catch up to them. And that was the story of the first successful co-housing community in the country. So I think that is the model that we should look at, not
So-
necessarily to create a co-housing community, but that recognize that the overlay should figure out that this is going to be a partnership thing, and we should lubricate the sense, whether it's done through the bylaw or whether it's done through some other municipal mechanism that sets Valley CDC or someone like that up as a preferred developer and expects that that's the way it would happen.
So maybe it occurred to me, maybe maybe what would help us navigate this a little bit is either inviting some or going to one of the Affordable Housing Trust meetings or some of those members for this conversation. My sense is they've thought about this quite a lot. And so maybe their input would be welcome and then help us.
They
roll
may
this
not
out.
have thought about it from a regulatory bylaw adjustment point of view. They may
No,
have.
but just in terms of the dispersion
Mm.
versus grouping versus how to navigate that
Yeah.
and frankly speak about it in the right way.
Yeah.
Might be valuable to get some input there. Doug,
I guess I'm a little bit, maybe I'm behind the rest of this conversation, but I guess I'm wondering why, whether all you really need to do is remove the distribution requirement that shows up now. If you just remove that, then you leave it open for people, developers like, developers in town who already are doing inclusionary zoning, to decide whether they want to integrate it into their main building or whether they want to do it as a separate area and concentrate it in some way.
Yeah.
Do we need to get into that? I guess is what I'm thinking, and it's kind of hard for us to do that.
I think, yes, you're absolutely right. I think what happened at our last conversation about it was we were enjoying the idea that this is also an opportunity to make a new neighborhood, more or less, with a large number of units, inclusionary and otherwise, that would be distinct from the student-oriented housing. I think that's why this got to this point in the conversation. But yeah, I think you're right. We could just remove the blank on the word, the requirement that it's distributed and see what happens. Sure. Bruce, go ahead.
I think we want to figure out a way to direct it more than Doug's talking about. We should put some effort into trying to force the outcome in a direction rather than just take the lid off the pot. Just a point of view.
Yep. Nate, go ahead.
Yeah, I think some of this was, we've heard at some of the apartment complexes that have inclusionary units that sometimes they're hard to stay filled because the way they are dispersed, and even if they were even kind of closer together, there's just not enough density of, say, non-students or families or to make it worthwhile. And so I think when we thought about this is that there's actually the idea of having so many units would actually create a large number of affordable units that it would actually having designated areas would make sense only in that, it's not like 4 units. I mean, we could be talking about, a few hundred, if the whole thing were developed, if 3,000 units were developed and we're at 10% or 15%, it's a lot of affordable units. So I don't, I agree we could get rid of that requirement. At the same time, if we left it to the developer and they said, oh, we're just going to put them all in this one area in this one building, or we're going to disperse them, and it's not working out, I think it's a hard thing to go back after the fact and fix it. I think it's a really good thing to kind of talk about what do we think a good approach would be.
So then I'm sort of back to what I suggested before, which is, or, requiring that they are on one portion of the parcels. And if it's all on the same side, for example, on the East Pleasant side, then they can design and build them how they want, but at least it's creating that whole street row of these, in theory, non-student oriented units. So it kind of splits the middle of what we're talking about, meaning trying to gather all the resources to build a whole new thing separately versus telling the developers, you figure it out, but there's still a requirement here, but doesn't have to go hand in hand with the neighbor development. Yeah. Doug?
Would it be enough to just say all the affordable units would need to be in the building that's fronting North Pleasant Street? And then separately, we've defined what the mass or the heights are as you move from North Pleasant Street west.
Yeah, I mean, that could do it, unless we imagine there might be multiple low buildings on that edge, but yes, sure. Exactly sort of what I was thinking about, yeah. You just said it more intelligently. Okay, so where are we? Bruce, what do you make of that idea, rather than trying to gather the resources and
Yes, no, I think that's fine. I think this is going to take a lot more discussion, and we're going to keep circling back on this, and we're going to refine it. But the two things at the moment are that I guess there are three things. The first is that we will maintain the requirement for inclusionary affordable housing. Number two is, and Doug's point was interesting because it separates this. That number two is that we will argue or that we should eliminate the requirement for dispersal. And number three then is that we not only eliminate the requirement, which is I characterized as taking the lid off the pot, but we should then try and direct the steam in a particular place. So that's number three, and I agree with all of those. And I'm sure we're going to get to elaborate number three. It's going to take some time to figure out how and what we can do and what we can do that is most likely to be most effective. And that's the real challenge here. I think the first two, maintaining the inclusionary zoning and eliminating the requirement to disperse, those are two very simple, basically, acts. Number three is the mercurial part of it, where we don't quite know how it's going to work through. But I think we will take the time and trouble to discuss this and figure it out, I think, about whether we figure out what's the most best we can do. Because you're right, Doug's right, we don't want to overreach because that becomes a discouragement. We don't want to discourage people from doing what we're trying to encourage them to do simply because of an unintended consequence of an overreaching requirement. That would be very sad.
Yep. Okay, Karen, you had your hand up? Oh, it's down.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna ask, I agree with what Fred said. I knew North Village when it was such a wonderful place for families, and I don't know what we can do to encourage in parts of this, what power we have. I mean, only the university can say this is for married graduate students. I imagine we can't do that. But how can we encourage on part of this, the kind of development which does provide the kind of community that these married students need, because that's now missing, and that was so vital and so important.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know how we can require it. I think we can have language describing what we imagine, right, as part of this, but yeah, I'm not sure what else we can do on that front. All right, let's maybe switch gears a little and look at some of the points Nate put in this document. I can share it unless you all have it in front of you.
I have it open in front of me.
So, oh, Doug, did you get it? You want me to forward it to you? Or you want me to share it?
I'm sorry, which file?
Maybe
Uh,
share it, Jesse. I think
I mean,
it'll be
I
quicker.
did get a bunch of files from Nate that I could open up.
Yeah, the Word document, that's North Amherst overlay 42325.
All right, okay.
And so, yeah, just some description of what's there already. Redevelopment potential. So existing density is 1950, oh no, 3 times the existing density. So Doug, we've been working with this idea. I guess this came from the study 10 years ago, whenever it was, that we should try and accomplish 3 times what's there as being reasonable for developers. Is that where that number came from, Nate?
Right. Yeah. The market study suggested 3 to 5 times the density would be enough to incentivize this kind of infill.
Okay, so we want 2,000 units. And then, yeah, so I guess starting with the height is a simple way to think about it, in my mind, right? Unless someone has another suggestion where to start the conversation about what it should be.
Yeah. I mean, I think last time we had said, I think it's a good place. Like, is it 3 stories along the street and it can get to as high as 6 at some point behind we could have some dimension, some measurement off the street.
Yeah. And so if we did that, let's say we went with exactly that, 3 the street side to 7 all the way west. And we'd have some, I guess we'd have some definition of how many feet from the street it would have to stay at 3 stories, right? And then it could go up, whatever the setback, some kind of requirements like that, like we were talking about with the University Drive as well. I'm guessing, Nate, you haven't had a chance to sort of do the math, meaning what does that mean if we're trying to get 2,000 units, right?
No, I mean, I did I had shown those orange rectangles in one of the maps that, essentially we'd have to have, so many North Square apartments or, developments to get that density. And so it's, that's done with 4 stories and there's still a fair amount of parking. So, I haven't figured out exactly how that works.
Right.
But
So-
I think to me, it's possible, if we had a mix of even just 3 to 5 stories and generous lot and building coverages and like no setbacks or certain things, I think it could happen. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of like the idea of having 1 or 2 or 3 defined setbacks. So the first third from North Pleasant going east is 3 stories, then the middle section maybe allowed up to 5 stories, and then the last section up to 7 stories, something like that. Obviously not saying that's what they have to be, but setting that height limit so that the massing does sort of stay flat from when you're looking east to west. If I explained that correctly. Other thoughts on how we might structure this?
At the moment, I didn't put my hand up. Is that okay? No one else?
Yeah, sure. Of course.
Uh, Keeping it simple to start with, I think that's a good idea. That we recognize, I think, that that there's a 20-foot 2-story, a 2-floor plus grade from the east side to the west side. So notionally, if we were to build 5 stories on the west, they would appear as 3 stories. The roof heights would be as 3 stories on the east. So I would think that we could maybe imagine 5 to 6 stories at least, or 5 to 7 stories on the west, and then 3 to 5 on the center, and 3 on the on the eastern zone, and as you say, the 3 stripes, and think of it that way, and then let Nate work with that and see whether there's that seems to be a defensible proposition for the at least a.
Yeah, so then it just,
I can see myself arguing against all of my neighbors on that proposition.
just,
Not necessarily winning, but
right, so then the question is if we can get to the 2,000 units with that scheme.
with that, yes. And as Nate said, it probably depends on some parking assumptions and
Right.
things like that. So as we get further into this, Nate, I could you could give me homework if you want. I've got some time that I could sit down and unlike Doug and you, I'm a retired gentleman, so if there's some calculations that I could usefully do, if or questions, let's say, that could be usefully answered that would save you some time, I will take direction if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, I think I like that idea of just the, gradation and heights. I think the next thing is, open space and kind of the traffic, parking, kind of utility infrastructure. What we think is reasonable, or do we have any minimum requirements? So if typically if it was a site and we say, oh, we're going to be doing a conventional subdivision, we might back out 15% or some percentage to accommodate roads and driveways. Do we have do we work on those assumptions, or are we saying this could be really flexible, like University Drive, and try to come up with what we think is a good site plan, and then, or a few ideas for site plans, and maybe we see what kind of zoning gets there. So Bruce, I'd be willing, if you had an idea, if you want to come up with a few concept sketches, and then we could look at them and say, okay, what does this mean in terms of zoning? Like, how do we do this in terms of dimensional standards or other requirements? As opposed to going at it, looking at the dimensional standards first, let's try to envision a few different ideas and see how that could work with zoning. Maybe a little different approach.
Well, Nate,
So-
if you wouldn't mind, could I come in and spend half an hour with you to get me going? Because I don't want to get off
Sure.
on. This is not my thing, really. I'm an architect. This is not what I do mostly. And when I do, I'm usually working with planners and folks and so forth. So I know how it feels, but I can't necessarily guide that ship particularly. So I'll come in. We'll make a time.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, no, even if it's just ideas, getting the land use constraints and looking at topography, and just, even if it's just kind of diagrammatic, what are good areas and how does it look like?
Yeah. Well, I'll probably bring cutout blocks.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, the first question is in that if we go with that increasing height east to west, if we do some rough calculations and realize, oh, that's 4,000 units we could fit with that plan, then that gives us a lot of space for open space requirements, parking requirements, etc. If we realize, oh no, that's only 1,500 units, it's a different conversation. So to me, that feels like an important first step to think about the rest, right?
Yeah. Okay, well,
if the goal is really at least 3x density.
Yeah. So I'll make cutout blocks. I'll make them different colors for different stories, and with numbers on them, and it'll be fun.
Sounds like fun. I wish I had the time to do it with you.
We'll video it for you.
Okay, sounds good. Next on your list, Nate, was, oh, sorry, Nate, is your hand still up? Okay, it's not. You had architectural style and design guidelines. I feel like we're very preliminary for that conversation. Flexibility of overlay or predictability. What does that mean, Nate?
Right. So I think some of it would be, if we have, are we going to be prescriptive in our setbacks, in our height, in our design standards, or is it, something that then gets discussed during permitting, and so a developer wouldn't know exactly if it was approved or not. I mean, so I think some of the councilors brought this up with University Drive overlay. Sometimes being flexible means it may not be predictable. So although it's site plan review, is there a possibility that the planning board puts a lot of conditions on it that really changes it, or would we be flexible and say, no, you know what, you don't have any parking here, and then in the end we want to have parking? And so it's kind of like the balance of that with this.
Gotcha. My thought on this overlay is it feels different than University and really any of the others areas that have come up because it's mostly hidden. And so to me, that leans me towards flexibility and seeing what the developers come up with. Again, it feels very different than University Drive, which is we all drive by every day when we go there. So we might want different standards. Or Atkins. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
So my feeling is that this is a chance to do exactly what Bruce and Nate want to do and kind of dream holistically and have sketches of this is possible and wouldn't this be nice? This is where the bicycle path to the university could go. This is if we make this building taller, we have this great place for a communal, picnic area or something like this. Here you can dream and look at it holistically and then come back and say, okay, in order to accomplish all this, we need to be a little bit more prescriptive than just opening it up to developers. I think we should really look at what are possibilities that we could see of this developing as a dense student, but still beautiful addition to our community. Yeah, and that would determine a lot of the details later that we would strive for, if possible.
Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I kind of agree with you, Jesse. This one feels like it could be more flexible. And I view what Bruce has agreed to undertake as developing several potential scenarios so that we can figure out how to create a zoning structure that would allow those and anything else that somebody else could imagine with some boundaries, and then and then leave it up to whoever shows up, because they're going to have thought more about it than we did.
Yeah. I guess I'd like to share with you all some thoughts that both the Atkins project and reading the housing production plan really sort of gelled in my mind the last few weeks, which are, I feel like there's 4 or 5 areas like this that we're gonna get to hopefully eventually, meaning there's University Drive, there's North Amherst, there's East Amherst, maybe Atkins is one of them. There's maybe potential in other neighborhood pockets close to university. And to me, the reason I feel flexible on this one, meaning allowing flexibility, is because it's probably the only place where I think we really just want to maximize density, almost at whatever other cost. Because each of the other areas, I feel the opposite. I feel like we as a planning board should be much more intentional and go after what we think is best for the town long term. This is the one pocket where I feel differently, that I feel like, yeah, tell the developer, just go to town, do what you can. So that's what's happening in my brain around these different locations.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bruce, go
I
ahead.
think I think I know what you're saying, and I think I agree with you, but I don't agree with the way you said it. What we are thinking about for North Amherst, I think, is for the good of the town, and so forth and so forth. So, but I do recognize that different sites will be constrained in different ways, and they'll all be constrained by people who don't want it in or near their backyard. So I'm discounting that. We just have to make the arguments and so forth. But there will be real constraints. And I agree that this one, because it's bounded by, I mean, it's unbounded really. We've got a wetland 116 along one long boundary, and we've got another kind of not terribly clear. Even Meadow Street is not very clear. It's not a lot of housing there. It's all pretty much student housing already, and there's farmland beyond that to the north. There's a very small amount of existing housing that we could probably imagine we should try and retain on North Pleasant Street side. So it's unusual in that respect, and that I think gives rise to me agreeing with what I think you're saying. But I wouldn't characterize it as somehow other places we have to be mindful of what's good for the town, whereas here we don't. I know you didn't mean to say that, but
Correct. I
that's
did
the
not.
way someone will who
Yes, no, that was
doesn't
poorly
like you
worded.
as much as I do
Yeah,
will
yeah.
interpret what you said.
Yes, I think the other way I would say it is the other areas, I think under consideration, I see more opportunities for non-residential, non-housing opportunities that are valuable for the town.
That's actually a good question here. I don't know whether Nate's got it in, but what level of mixed use should we imagine that we want in here?
Right. So that, yeah, we could talk about that certainly. That came up in our last conversation as well. I think I was the main one suggesting maybe we do want some, but I think I've changed my opinion on that, I don't think we need a mixed use requirement here very much at all, is where I'm landing.
I think I agree.
I was initially thinking maybe again on the street side, on the North Pleasant side, we want some to allow some. I think we still could allow it, but I don't think we need to require it. Other thoughts on mixed use versus just apartment? Yeah, Doug.
Yeah, I guess I envisioned the mixed use as happening kind of at the corner of North Pleasant Street and Pine Street. You know, but
That makes sense.
there are some historic properties there that, you know, people wouldn't want replaced with something that was retail oriented.
Mhm.
So
It's a bit of a
that's a different conversation, but for this parcel, I didn't see any need to require mixed use, although you could allow it. I think that would be okay,
Yeah,
at least within the first third near North Pleasant Street.
right. That's kind of what I was imagining initially.
You could allow it, so maybe that's not just an apartment overlay, it's got a couple of uses.
Yeah, I like that idea in the first third. Because then if it does develop into, you know, what we're talking about, meaning more family, maybe non-transient student populations, they might benefit from whatever it is, mini marts and laundromats and pizza shops, whatever. Sure. Okay, Karen. No, gotcha. I was taking some notes. Okay, next on Nate's list was affordability requirements, which I already talked about. We do want to keep it and maybe think about non-dispersing requirement. Visibility from Meadow and North Pleasant Street. Again, I think we're talking about this graded height, addresses that. Setbacks from neighboring properties. So I assume here we're talking about, can't remember, yeah, that one strip on the north end of North Pleasant where there are still a handful of, I guess they're single family houses. Is that correct? That's the only spot that's like that?
Right. Yeah. There's they're along the old, they're older homes along what isn't really a common, but just the wider part of the street.
Yeah, like from
Yeah.
Fisher Street to Meadow, basically. Looks like one,
Right.
two, three,
Yeah.
4, 5, 6, 7 properties maybe. Yeah, I think probably respecting that a little and putting some setback there would make sense. Bruce?
we thought about this for the basically the similar amount of at University Drive on the again on the northeast
Yeah.
strip. And uh, is there any reason why we wouldn't do something similar? Is
You mean some foot distance from the
Yes, the
property
dimensions
line?
may change,
Yeah.
but a certain way in you have to or your three-story unit can't start for a certain distance. And
Yeah.
I don't know what those numbers are, but I think it would be important to those abutters. And there may be more than that. Maybe there's screening required, although if we give our people plenty of warning about this. Of course, there would be warning because no one's going to start building these things on day one. They could begin planting and all sorts of things, and they
Sure.
so. But I think some kind of uh, and whether we would allow parking close but not buildings, or whether it would want to be a green buffer of some sort. I know that began to be a question about on the U Drive is not just buildings, but whether we feel about parking close to the boundary. How do we feel about dumpsters and
Yeah.
ancillary kind of things close to the boundary? And so maybe those are the three questions that we ask ourselves here and decide how much. I mean, I think it might be because it's a small area, and we could keep those, and we're taking some of the well, the overlay goes into the backs of some of those houses. The idea is that those folks, if they chose, could sell the tail end of their properties to the developer. And if we were to give them some requirement of buffering, it's kind of interesting. It's like winning your cake and eat it too. I
Yep.
sell my land and I still get to control some aspects of what goes on it. But I think there's few enough of those houses and that we can probably make some moves that would be placative to the neighborhood.
I agree. I agree. And I think probably to be determined by what we figure out about unit numbers. Right? Again, if we learn that, oh yeah, we can fit 4,000 units with this scheme, we have more flexibility to put
Yeah.
in for setbacks or different requirements. So again, that feels like the first step to get a sense of what we're really talking about density wise. Other thoughts on that? I'm guessing we're all probably in agreement about that. Okay. Next, Nate had parcel aggregation or individually developed. I would think either, frankly. I don't think we need to say they must be developed together. If a developer wanted to do that, I think that could be great too. If they could get multiple properties. Other thoughts on that point? Okay.
I think when I do the if they be this scenario development, I would be inclined to keep the parcel separations in place. I think it's because then we would not only imagine that a developer would choose to demolish the housing that they have on theirs and do something, they're also taking an even bigger leap, which is aggregation. And so I think our planning should be based on a less grandiose aspiration than aggregation.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's see. And then
These are the notes from previous.
yeah, a bunch of notes which we've touched on much of. So
Yeah.
I've been adding in notes from this conversation into these first main bullet points, much of which is reflected, but in more questions down below. But again, I think we've got to start with, are we getting the right numbers of units with this height plan? Because if the answer is no, I think it'll lead us in a different direction. If it's yes, we can start to fill in a lot of these details.
Are you doing minutes for this meeting?
I'm just taking some notes. I will
Yeah.
make some minutes eventually.
Well, what I was thinking, whether you do it or I do it or whoever does it, basically taking Nate's Word file here and just adding commentary within the points
That's
that he's
kind of what
already
I was
got.
just doing in that
Yeah,
section.
okay. Well, if you, I'll stick with my homework assignment and I won't volunteer to do this as well.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay. That to me feels like a pretty good place to maybe stop on this for tonight. Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned minutes, and I just wondered where on the town website would I find the minutes of this subcommittee?
Nate?
That's a great question. I can send them to you.
So
Well,
I will.
I
Yeah.
spent some time at one point looking for your minutes and I couldn't find them.
Yeah, we'll
It's
get them up there, Doug. I put a request into IT to have a new archive center
I see.
created for the housing subcommittee. So
Okay.
I can follow up this week and I'll get them up there.
If you'd like, in the meantime, Doug, I have just a
No,
Google
I
folder
mean,
with them all in.
frankly, I just want to make sure we don't get another public records complaint.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. Did we have one at
That's
some
an
point?
experience I don't want to repeat.
When did that happen and what was it for?
Well, we probably maybe a year or no more than 2 years before, I guess most of you came on the board, we were having a pretty intensive set of meetings and had a couple of big projects on, I think it was on Pleasant Street downtown that were happening, and we got behind on the minutes. And at some point, a member of the public complained to the Attorney General's office that we were not, doing our obligation to post the minutes in a timely manner. So we ended up basically asking everybody on the board to do at least one and maybe two sets of minutes to help us get caught up, which most people did, not everyone did, but and then since then I've been I felt like I needed to kind of keep after
Yeah, I hear you.
staff, Nate, no disrespect intended, to make sure they were getting done in a timely way.
Yeah, I mean, those minutes that were circulated by Chris for 4 years, 5 years ago, I noticed that the ending time for that meeting was 10:50
Yeah,
something, 11 o'clock.
Oh
I
my
mean,
goodness.
it was a more intense period, and we
Well,
also had one member of the board who wanted extremely detailed minutes, so it was taking staff a little longer to do it. So it was a combination of things, but again,
Yeah.
that's where I'm coming from. As much as I'd love to spend an afternoon reading your minutes, Jesse, that's not why I'm asking.
Well, I would say two things. One, I know all about public record stuff and I don't want to talk about it and from my job. And
Yeah.
two, if we have meetings that go past 10:30, I'm just gonna leave. I'm saying that now.
Right. Well, I'm about ready to leave this one. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other last thoughts for tonight? I guess we have to finish the agenda with there's no one in the public, so no public comment. Any new business from anybody? Okay,
No.
great. Then I guess we're adjourned. Thank you all. I'll see you.
Thank you,
next-
Jesse. Thank you all. Thanks,
Great.
Doug, for coming along.
Good conversation. Yeah, thanks. See ya.